Twain Manor, a palatial estate located on a small island in the Saginaw River. Rain beats down on the grass and the grapes and the glass of the windows looking into the manor. Thunder strikes. Inside the manor, you're in a room under the grand staircase in the foyer of the manor. With you is Lulabelle Twain, a mangled portrait of the beloved Saint Simone, racks of coats, umbrellas, and hats, and, of course, a corpse.
Apologies for the painting. I thought there would be more to that when I ripped it open. Oh yes, the dead body.
Fair's mystery begins with episode 101 of the podcast, Side Character Quest. Find his adventure and more at sidecharacterquest.com or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Hello and welcome to the DM's Book Club, a weekly book club podcast where we talk about some Dungeons and Dragons most of the time and how we could include it and improve it in our own campaigns. With me, back again, third time's the charm. It's Ty. Woohoo! How are you doing, my friend? All good?
I'm doing good. Have I wooed at the beginning of every one of these? I think I might have.
I don't know, but I you know what? If that's your thing, take it.
That's the energy I'm bringing.
So yeah, you're back again. And this time, this is a very different topic because it's not D&D,
yes.
Which obviously we're all big fans of, like talking about things that aren't D&D in this podcast. We like any kind of thing. So what are we talking about today, Ty? What's our topic of choice?
Yes, I have brought two separate, well, I was going to say games, but then one of them doesn't describe itself that way. Two separate quote-unquote games. One is called Timeskip, and that's by A.A. Voigt. And then we're also doing Artefact by Mousehole Press.
Two very different games. So I have on Where I've played through Artefact, which I thought was a very good, very fun solo TTRPG, but I'd not heard of Timeskip. So why have you brought these quote unquote games for us to talk about today then?
Yes. So I brought them for a couple of reasons. One is that I think that that these are both made by game designers who deserve some attention, right? Like it's cool to like highlight some stuff that is coming out that's smaller teams.
Yes.
Also, while Artifact is a full-fledged game in its own right, like you can just play Artifact by itself. I feel that both of these games / tools can be great additions to help you with very particular problems inside of a D&D campaign or inside of like a campaign being run in any other system. Like this could be Pathfinder, it could be Morkborg, it could be whatever. Lots of different things. And I think it's fun to think of where there are gaps in the design of D&D, not necessarily because of mistakes or anything, but just because, no one system can cover everything you might want to accomplish.
So yeah, one thing I love about role-playing games, and one of the reasons I really love like reading through them and stuff like that, is often that you'll get like a solo RPG of some sort. And like I said, Artifact is that, about this idea of creating a relic of some magical properties that's handed down from keeper to keeper and sort of documenting that story. And I really love solo RPGs, but then they're meant to be the solo player. You create this thing, it's like in your head, very much like with GMs and DMs creating this world, and that no one really gets to see it. But then at the end of Artifact, it goes, if you want to, you could put this into a campaign. And I'm a big fan of solo RPGs that whatever you produce, whether it's like backstories between two characters that you're sort of playing with, and being able to put it into a campaign, that's great, because then it's like, oh, that's gone and done. You've done something with that work. It's not just for you anymore. You could be a part of a bigger thing. And the same thing with Timeskip, which is more of a, from what I understand, it's more of a group collaboration of a pre-existing campaign that you work with.
On the note of Timeskip being something within a particular campaign, I was looking over the rules yesterday in preparation for this, and I saw that it's a time skip in the beginning description of what this is. It doesn't say it's a game, which is what I stumbled over earlier during the conversation. It says time skip is a world building tool in which characters from a previously established tabletop role-playing game campaign will rapidly advance through time. So it is describing it not as a game, but as a tool. It is really like saying, hey, you may not have mechanics to accomplish this in whatever campaign, whatever system you are normally using. Here are some mechanics for you to use. I also think it's interesting that it specifically says a world building tool.
Yes.
Because you normally think of world building as something that is, first of all, in the traditional vein of TTRPGs, you think of it as something that is purely of the game master's domain.
Exactly, yeah.
But then also it's something that you typically think of as like happening at the beginning of the campaign. So it's interesting that they're framing it that way for something that is intrinsically, like specifically designed for the middle.
And that's the thing that got me, because exactly as you said, like I was thinking like, oh, session zeros, there are world building RPGs out there. I know there's an RPG designer called Ben Robbins who's done stuff like Kingdom and again, loads of ones I'll have to put in the show notes, but that idea of everyone contributing to creating this world timeline and stuff like that. But again, it's like what has come before, and that's why we are now, and then our story begins. Whereas here, it talks about this idea of like, as you said, like in the middle of a story, in a campaign where we rapidly jump your characters into the future, and then it says speculate on how that time has passed, affecting each of them. So essentially, it feels like we have stuff in D&D of like downtime. What do you do in between adventures? But what if your adventure isn't next week? It is literally in 5 years' time. What is it like that? And being able to do something that's not just like, oh, I guess I just do this. It actually sort of formulates like what things happen not only to your characters, but to important NPCs and other world factions at the same time. But rather than, as you were saying, like it being just the GM's responsibility, it's all the players taking like a part in it. I'd never come across that sort of thing before.
I thought it was interesting. I don't know if you clocked this, but they were saying that when you choose your player character, the character that you are playing as, each of the players are also recommended to choose a NPC or faction that they care about to also see what happens to them over time, which I think is really great. Also, this is another good little like mechanical decision. The player characters, because they're the more important thing, and because also they're the thing that, the GM might have like ideas for where they want stuff to go. The player characters get 9 turns to make decisions throughout playing a round of a game of time skip. But then the NPC that they control or the faction that they control, they only get 3 turns. So you don't have the opportunity for a person who would normally be a player and is, getting to decide what happens to their player character. The focus is staying on their player character, and they don't get to like wrest all of the control away from the GM and like make all of the decisions for somebody that previously the GM might have had plans for.
Actually, let's talk about the actual structure of the game, because I think that's kind of helpful, isn't it?
Yes.
So with time skip, you point in a facilitator. Usually it's going to be your GM, because they're the ones that have had the thing, but it doesn't have to be.
Like that they say it doesn't have to be, but
no, I know I'm a big fan of that as well, just because sometimes it's like, oh, we're going to try something out, and the GM can be a part of it. Gather supplies, safety tools. It's always good to see safety tools being used, because again, making sure that we're keeping ourselves safe. And what is a part of the story, even though we're not playing it through bit by bit, is just making sure that stuff that we don't want to be in our story isn't happening to our characters whilst we're sort of fast forwarding through. Choose the characters, and as you said, choose the faction or NPC, and then decide how long it will last, this time skip, this sort of thing, and then divide that period into sort of 3 equal sort of seasons, yeah. And it talks about like every time we sort of go through a season, its minimum should be about a year, but no big longer gaps like that. I think again, you can tailor that to your particular group, and then you play through each of these seasons with the characters either taking an action and filling out character clocks, but after every third play they'll fill out a consequent clock as well, which is usually something to do with like the NPCs or the factions. And as you said, once all the players have taken 3 turns, that's 1 season done. And then by the end of the 3rd season, that's when the game sort of ends. So yeah, you have that sort of 3 turns for each player. But obviously, depending on how many players you have, it could be the game length could vary quite a bit on that thing. So that's the sort of consequence. And one thing I was going to say, because you said clocked earlier, I was like, nice, I thought that was a cool pun. It does implement this idea of clocks or ways to sort of denote your progress. And obviously, there is a character sheet you can use for this sort of thing. But that idea of like when you complete an action or if you do something, you fill in one portion of it. And when you do that, depending on what the action is, you get a prompt to be like, what inspired your character to do X? So if it's like changing up their appearance, what is it that they change and why, what inspired them? If they choose a different career, what motivates them to do that sort of thing. So it's quite nice in that sort of sense.
I think it would be helpful to point out to actually read through one of those clocks.
Let's do it.
The character clocks, just because I remember when I was reading this, it didn't quite click until I actually looked at the options.
Absolutely.
So first of all, you mentioned like that a player on their turn can either do an action or can do a character clock.
Correct.
Can like do a segment of a character clock.
Yes.
The basic divider there, for anybody listening who hasn't read this thing, actions are like the things that are smaller changes to your character that they could reasonably do in a shorter period of time.
Yes.
So like changing your outfit or appearance is one thing.
Yes.
Starting or leaving a career. Like that might be a big moment, right? It could be a huge thing to happen to your character, but it's a singular event. The character clocks, number 3. This clock only has 2 portions, which means that you're going to end up answering 2 questions. When you fill out the first portion, you answer the first question, fill out the second.
Yes.
You answer the second. So complete a significant creative or scholarly work. So you're like going to make a painting, a symphony, something like that. Portion 1, somebody would ask you like, hey, all right, so Fiona, you want your character to create a significant creative or scholarly work.
Yep.
Portion 1, if you want to fill that out, you've got to tell us why do you want to make that thing, and we need you to describe a part of the creative process where you hit a low point and how you got out of your slump.
Oh, proper Dark Night of the Soul stuff. I love that.
Yeah. Maybe you don't want to complete that clock, complete the second portion next turn. Maybe you don't end up completing it until the 3rd season. But you finally get back around to it. You're like, oh crap, I haven't ever gone back and finished the thing. So you do the second portion, describe the finished product and how it is used or experienced afterwards. I think that is like a very nice level of guidance.
Yes.
I don't know. Do you have any immediate thoughts on this?
Yeah, no, I think you picked a really good prompt there, because there are other ones like develop a strong relationship, move your home, all this stuff. Again, as you said, I like the description you did between like actions, which is it feels like a big action, but it's like a small dot on the big timeline that we're doing in Timeskip. But then something that takes a lot longer, like he was saying, so like this creating a body of work, etc. It totally makes sense. And there's like 10 choices for each of them, but then split into those portions. I think what it makes me think of, like certainly what you described there with that example, is that instantly I'm like, right, I can describe like a little vignette of something, and it can be third person, I could be as descriptive as one. But I know something that was in one of the previous sort of like guidances coming up to it. You don't spend too long. As you have, I think, a roughly under 5 minutes in the spotlight for this, maybe 2 minutes or something. Yeah. So you're not forcing someone to like suddenly role play lots of stuff out as one person or monologuing too much if they don't feel comfortable doing it. But it also means that people have a limited time to get that idea across, and what prompts you to do that. And again, so it does feel very solo RPG in that sort of sense. And what I love about it is that I certainly, the way you described it is like, so how do you get out of your creative slump? And then you might not come back to that, finishing that clock until at the end, maybe never. So I like the idea to go, yeah, started.
You don't have to.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I like that. I like how these bigger progresses, by the end of Timeskip, you be like, oh, well, I've started something. I'll get back to it at some point, and maybe you do another Timeskip later on or something like that. So I like that idea of like you can start putting like always these background stories or background things in that downtime that then follow on into the story when you restart the main
campaign.
Yeah, the main core. Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, I was getting excited about that as a concept, and you were already getting there.
No, I love it. No, that's great. That's great. About you.
But yeah.
I wonder, like, when would you use this particular thing? Is it between the GM starting the next adventure, like, having to do like a couple of weeks of research, and it's like, okay, we're going to maybe have like, we still want to meet up. We still want to play games, but we still want to use our characters. So then, maybe one night having a time skip and playing that out. And it's like, it's just going to be less than 2 hours. And it's obviously there's not really any mechanics. You're not rolling dice or anything like that. Only if you're going to do some randomization, which again is something I'd find interesting. But just to go back slightly, that idea of like, okay, so on your turn, you could choose, like you said, either the small action thing or fill a character clock. But with permission, you could then suggest to fill in another character clock. Don't worry about your own character or NPC or faction. It's more about somebody else, because then maybe you've got a good idea. And I think that idea of that, I like that idea. Is that sort of thing where, again, you're sharing that passion for the other players at the table and like, I've got a good idea. Does this sound good? And then, of course, you can say no and stuff like that. But I like that you could, to help somebody else out, if it doesn't look like they're going to finish their clock for whatever reason, you could be like, well, I could help with that. And if we can give that, I can give you that, my thing, and give that sort of teamwork. And I just thought that was just a really cool thing you could do. I don't know if people would do it, because I feel like, certainly with player characters, because there's so much, I'm always a big fan of player characters being, they are a part of you. And so maybe something like this is a bit too precious, perhaps, but I like the fact that it is there, and people, with the consent, and if people have a good idea and wish to spend an action for somebody else, I think that's worth doing. But I don't know if I'd do it myself, if you see what I mean, unless I trusted people around the table.
I could see it happening less so, to your point, like less so from a situation of wanting to, I wouldn't want to infringe on some plan that somebody else had.
Yes.
Like to that point that you had. But I could see a situation. There's one on here that says found a new faction or ideological movement. That's a 3-portion clock. I could see that being a thing that the party decides to do together. Let's say it's a 3-person party and they're like, we are all doing this, so we're all going to do one portion of it. And because we're answering different questions each time, we all get to have a hand in like how this forms,
I really like that. I like that idea of like, if we, again, looking through the things and what appeals to people, oh yes, this, and then each of us gives up a part of that, of one of our actions in a season. I really like that. I think that's pretty good. And then what happens is that for every action or for every character clock segment that is filled, the facilitator fills one of the consequence clocks, so either a faction or NPC. And then once that is filled, usually they have 3 portions themselves, 3 segments. When that is filled, then their prompt comes up. So, for example, if I was looking at the faction consequence clocks, like economic, number 4, the faction's financial situation changes. Maybe a demand that soldiers receive back pay causes a budget crisis, or an important trade deal causes a windfall. What is this economic change, and how does it affect the faction? So It sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like the facilitator sort of like goes, your player A is controlling the Thieves Guild. And he goes, right, I'm going to fill like 3 segments of the Thieves Guild, and I'm going to give you this prompt. And that's what it feels like, rather than the GM answers that prompt, if you see what I mean. Because I feel like you're taking...
I don't know.
I feel like because it's either you take an NPC or a faction as well as your own character, right? I don't know if the GM... the GM answers for the big bad. That was their thing that we should have said at the beginning. So not only do you take it, often the GM will take the big bad as well. So I don't know. It's just, I just wondered who would answer those questions.
I also forgot about this. So looking in the consequence clocks play section, it says that each season there are 3 consequence clocks that get filled up, and each player gets to answer 1 question a season.
I see. Right.
Okay, this is another question for you.
Yeah, I'm loving this.
They make the point that this is designed to be fairly freeform, right? Like it's designed to let the facilitator choose what consequence makes sense. Similarly, like when you're doing the time skip, when you're deciding what action your character is going to take, you choose what action you want to do.
Yes.
However, all of these sections have 10 options, and they gave the thing, like, if you want this to be random, you can roll a d10 and decide which one you would do. Would you ever do that?
I would, because I don't like choice, but okay. I would reserve the right to go
to refuse.
I don't like that. I think that's the thing. Because I'm somebody, when I create characters and stuff like that, I always like going last, because I always like seeing like, okay, someone had a really strong idea to do a fighter. Someone had a really strong idea to do a warlock, and I go, I'll come in the middle and see that the party needs this. And so I think I do like the idea of that random element, but yeah, I always reserve the right to be like, no, I don't like that. It's something that I would never think of, and being pushed in that direction. That's the improviser in me, is just like trying something new. But I can understand why people would not like that at all. But I guess if you've got 10 options for each of, the character clocks, the faction, and NPC, that's 30 choices that if you're, again, even though it is incredibly rules light, as we say, I cannot describe how simple it is just reading through free form it is. But if people don't have time to read through 17 pages, even though before you start,
some of it's glossary.
Some of it's glossary, some of it is safety tools and stuff like that, and going over what a facilitator is, then absolutely, yeah, I'd say roll a d10. But I would definitely check with the players first, because because I appreciate, again, I don't know if this would be a game. I would assume that you would play it both in person and online. I know we always talk about this between us, but like, again, is that something where I think online it's very easy to just go, oh yeah, I'll roll a d10 and see, and see if that inspires me, so to say. What about you? Would you take the randomization, or are you not sure?
I think I would do the same thing that you did, of rolling and then reserving the right to change my mind. This actually came up. I mentioned earlier that I played Token on Friday. I played that last week, and there was a random table that I rolled, and I remember just looking at it and just looking up at my buddy that I was playing with, and we were just like, this is not going to work.
So, no.
we just ditched it and re-rolled, and I used the second option.
Right, exactly.
And I think that a lot of fun can come out of those rolls. So I think that, like, if you have any hesitation, like, let's say you are being forced to go first, and you're like, what, could you guys go first? And like, no, Fiona, it's your turn to go first.
Me.
Then it could be nice to just like, all right, I'll just roll. I'll see if it shakes anything loose in my brain.
Yeah.
If it does, then great. If it doesn't, then that'll have bought me some time.
Yeah, well, and also, as we were saying before, if someone has a good idea for how that they can, if they're the note keeper, and you, like you said, we need to take over, become the leader of already previous faction, and I'm just like, who can I be? Oh, well, here's some esoteric names, it's also for other people at the table. It's not just the person that's turn it is. It's for other people who go, oh, that's really interesting. Do I want to do that on my turn? Like, because they might have only looked, they might have already pre-picked certain choices. And I mean, it talks about before about that idea about, well, what if two people want the same thing, and it's like, just narratively talk it out. Like, again,
that's fine.
It's fine. Like, but yeah, I like that idea. If anything, what Timeskip does is that nice thing of like encouraging what I see as downtime as a collaborative experience, rather than, so what are you doing in your downtime? And I'm like, I'm training and buying a weapon. It's like, all right, that is done. What are you doing? Like, here it's like, oh, so they're doing this. Well, that could affect this, and we could do this together as a team. So I like the initial sort of collaborative nature of it, as well as not only being about the primary characters, but also what's the big bad up to? What are these factions? What are these NPCs that you love? What, because they also grow in time too, which the players might not consider.
Yeah.
When it's just like a normal, okay, we've got a shopping episode, in D&D. Like, they don't necessarily think about the NPCs and what they're up to.
That's true. Another really good use for this game, like a reason I think that if I was playing in a campaign and my GM was like, hey, let's try this, so you want to try this, and we had been playing for like a year. This is true of me generally, and I bet this is true of you, and I bet this is true of a lot of people listening. There is always going to be like that one thing you've wanted your character to have the chance to do that they've never had the chance to do in the campaign, just because it just hasn't come up.
Yeah.
And here is a time skip where you can be like, finally, I can fit that in. I can find a place for that thing, for them to, start the narrative journey that leads to them being able to multi-class, or I can have them start a family because I realized that, like, it doesn't really, like, I want to explore like parenthood or something. That's just the first example that came to mind.
No,
personal example.
But it's true, because often these stories, it's always like action now. Like, there's always a joke. Possibly a crude joke, but that sort of thing, that you're in the dungeon, but where's the bathroom? It's like, well, why are we focusing on that? Because like, adventure is here. It's not the focus.
Skip is entirely spent in the bathroom.
Yeah, it's bathroom breaks, totally. But you're right. It's about all the other stuff around the things like when we tell stories of like, oh, adventurers, etc., you're only going to tell about like the time you defeated a dragon rather than the time you moved house, even though that is quite important to your characters and probably quite important to the players as well. So yeah, I agree. It's about fitting in those things that aren't necessarily a level up or a mechanical upgrade, even though some of them can be for sure. But it's like, I love that idea that, yeah, oh, it means I now get to explore. What if I did go and try to get an invite to this fancy schmancy like supper club? You know, I don't know.
Yeah.
Like...
I also noticed like games like Forged in the Dark games, Blades in the Dark specifically.
Yes.
They have mechanics similar to this built in. Like they have a downtime phase where they encourage these sorts of things to happen. Although I understand different game masters kind of treat that a little bit differently. But in the game that I played in, they treated it as this sort of like, you know, here's either a week, a day, a few months, you know, however long, where something is happening, where you can like make these sorts of choices. Even in a game like that, I could imagine somebody turning to this tool, to Timeskip, because of the freedom that it gives you and the prompts that it gives you. I feel like it just will lead to a different type of character building.
Yes.
You know, like the stuff in Blades in the Dark, typically you're going to be focused on doing things that are mechanically helping your character, you know, hopefully in a nice flavorsome way.
I like as well, you've hit it quite nicely, because most of these are just prompts, but they're all system agnostic. They are just sort of a generic sort of thing. They genre agnostic as well.
For the most part, yeah.
I think to be fair, clocks instantly I go, oh yes, it's a Forged in the Dark game of some sort. But you're right, you could be any game, and I like that as well. Like, you're not restricted for it having to be a fantasy or a sci-fi or a noir, anything in between. So it was very interesting to read it through, because I had, again, that sort of thing. It's, what if we skip 5 years in the future? What has changed? Because you will be changed. And then, going through, still keeping that focus on the characters and the people in their immediate circle, but then also being able to sort of like still go through the moments, but rather than role playing it all out and sort of like feel like every action you've done has like, this is a canon event, this is a core memory that you have, and it's led you to who you are now. So I think it's a very succinct, as you said, sort of resource to do so. Do you have any sort of like, I hate the word criticism as a thing, but is there any critiques would you give of it? Anything you think would improve Timeskip as a resource, do you think, if anything?
I mean, aesthetically, right? But like, this is a very bare bones game. And I think that works to its advantage.
Yes, I agree.
But you know, it's always a thing. Like if you know, had the resources and time to like clean it up and just make it a little bit prettier, then that'd be great.
Yes.
It is perfectly serviceable. It's like nice. You know, they did a very good job of making it like clean and readable. So like, I have no complaints about that. But it would be nice if it looked cool.
Yes, yeah.
But that is praising with faint damning, I guess.
I do agree. The actual document itself, it's spread out over 17 pages. I don't think it needs to be spread out that much. I think it could all be fit within under 10 pages. So I think layout could be improved, as always with these things. I'm not keen on the background, whatever the text is. I'm like, just keep it off white for printing. I think my only real criticism of it, because I love the concept of it, is that it doesn't feel like it has an end. So you do the 3 seasons, everyone does their turn, and it goes, and that's the end of the game. And I'm just there like, I would like a final, like I guess an epilogue or something to go around where people go, oh right, and now adventure awaits. Because obviously, to me, what happens is that you go back to your campaign or you do the next adventure. How do you do that?
I think it might be nice to have like an optional section, optional epilogue where you have something along the lines of, how do your characters get back together?
Yes.
Right? Like a set of prompts that are designed to potentially like get the adventure restarted, get the characters back together. Maybe the GM has a plan for this, right? And they say like, oh, we don't need to do that section, right? But if they don't, like, that could be a nice little button to help make this feel, to your point, like a more complete experience.
Yeah, I like that because I hadn't even considered that. That's how in my head I was like, well, they always have their HQ. The party has their HQ, and then you go off and do individual things. But like, there are many examples of like I'm thinking of like the Dragonlance novels where so the first one, the adventurers don't come back for 15 years and then they all come back for a certain thing and they're off doing their own thing. So of course they might not actually speak to each other. So if there's lots of solo, how do you bring the characters back? So I like that. Like, what's the inciting incident? What's the thing that turns you back? And having those optional, exactly that, an optional thing where you get the call and you're like, okay, I was one day away from retirement, but here we go again. So yeah, absolutely.
If you wanted to go a more poetic route, another option would be like having a little thing where you ask each of the characters, like, if assuming that this is a time skip where they're not seeing one another, which you know, that's a big assumption. But one option you could do is having a thing where you ask each of the players to say, all right, where would your character think the other person was? Like, what would they think had happened with them? Something like that.
Let's move on then to our other game, then Artefact. So we've talked a bit about it. Well, so this is technically, compared to Timeskip, this is more of a solo RPG, and it's about creating a item of magical properties and its history of being sort of handed down from keeper to keeper. It's inspired by The Skeletons by Jason Morningstar. So I don't know if you've played that game.
I didn't know that. No.
Yeah, no. It's a similar thing where, again, it's very rules light and it's just about that passage of time. And one of the key unique things about it, as I'm sure you know as well, is that idea that when you complete the prompt, you check off a moment in time, like how long does it take before your next keeper picks you up, and then you sit as the player in that silence.
Oh, it's so powerful.
I love it. That idea of like,
good.
you know, okay, you wait in silence with like, I don't know, say 2 minutes. That's been 5-10 years, and you're like, whoa. So, and that, like, what do you think about in that time? So, and just to clarify, the sort of skeletons, similar sort of concept, whereas you are skeletons protecting some sort of place of either a tomb or some sort of treasure, and you describe that your area and like what brings you to life, and then obviously over time the enemies get more and more powerful, and to the point that you are slain at the end. So it's a bit more doom and gloom compared to like an artifact that has a way to has a personality and has a way to sort of help or hinder its keeper. So I really enjoyed this game from Mousehole Press. It was one of my favorite solo RPGs that I did for Ware.
It's so great. I listened to that episode. It is a great episode. I so this is a game that is supposed to evoke like a sense of melancholy.
Yes.
And I really felt, I've played this behind the scenes. I did not get a chance to like review this before we hopped on, but I have played this twice, like a year ago.
Yes, the same. I only remember my experience of it and had a quick look at it. So yeah, but it's one of those games you learn by doing. And it's very. I found when I played it through for Ware, it like. I didn't have to stop too much. I was like, oh, this makes sense, and just take that time and stuff like that. So any solo, I think it was one of the better written solo RPGs that I've read through, which it was just very gentle about like, here's what you do, and don't worry, just go with the flow of it.
So it was suggested to me as something to use on my podcast, Side Character Quest. My friend Emma, who played Silas early on in the series, Emma recommended this game to me, and they were like, hey, I think we should play this together. And I was like, it's for the show? And I was like, they're like, yeah. And I was like, okay, well, I should go and read it and see how I can make this solo RPG work for a 2-player thing. And I found a way to make it work. I got another friend to like play test my idea with me. And it was wild because they ended up making so many similar choices.
Oh, interesting.
Like on paper, very similar choices to the choices you made. But the end result was so different. And that was such a cool experience for me, playing that and then listening to your episode and like seeing the divergence that can come from, you know, you got a paragraph long prompt on the page. You're thinking like, well, everybody's going to end up telling the same story. No. Not true.
Because, you have like these sort of 10 different items you could be, all the way from like footwear, which I love. I love the idea of like just being some pair of boots, to like an automaton, so almost like a mechanical servant. I think in my one, I went for a mirror at the end of the day. I can't remember exactly. You don't have to be like, I am a magical sword or I am a shield. Like, you know, those things are there. So it has a lot of archetypes that you could do, and then you answer those sort of prompts. And then the idea of like, you know, who is that picks you up, and being able to think about like, okay, we're in this time period or wherever it could be. Again, it indicates fantasy because of like weapon and shield and that sort of thing. It makes me think of high fantasy, but I think you could take it to be any genre. So you could put it into sci-fi, etc. And then depending on how you, again, with that sort of idea from Timeskip, like depending on the timeline, you could be lost for many, many times, but then it makes you ask questions not only about your keepers, but also about the world. Is it a world where fantasy has reigned for millennia, and the technology has not advanced? Or, because that's something I seem to remember with my one, is that I got to the point where I was like, well, it is now the future. And I was like, yeah, sci-fi is a thing. And I was in some sort of space museum, I think, in the end. So, and that was somewhere I didn't think I would go to, but I was like, well, no, it makes sense. Like, where would I go? And for me, it made sense not to be constantly, say, stuck in a certain period because of the years thing. I thought, well, technology must advance. So I think what I like about that, the unique sort of like time passing thing, is makes me think about, if this is true, what else is true of the outside world and the environment that then for my magical item doesn't fit in anymore. I'm maybe not as helpful anymore because, steam technology is here, or the industrialization has happened. It's like, oh, well, I am superfluous now. As again, I don't know if that's a commentary on AI. I just realized, but you get the idea. That's sort of like, well, where do we go from here?
I mean, I think that what you're pointing out about it taking such a long period of time, where you, as you're playing it, just sort of feel, well, of course these changes would happen in the world. I feel like that is perfectly highlighting how this very fun experience for one player can just easily transition into being a very powerful world building tool for a GM.
Absolutely.
Who, let's say, you've got to prep for a thing on like Saturday, and you really want to do like a original world, but you just don't have, like, you're just dead of ideas. This can help you come up with like multiple historical figures, multiple landscapes, and it doesn't feel like that's what you're doing.
No, not
like
at
it
all.
just feels like you're having fun. It's great.
Yeah, absolutely. Because obviously at the end it says, oh, if you want to put this item into your game, talk to your GM about stats. But you're right. That idea of these histories that, oh, there once was a fallen king, and then there was an uprising of bandits, and in your head as a GM, you know what that connection is, but the players will never know.
Yeah.
Unless they find that special item or the deck of many things, that sort of thing. So yeah, I really like that. And like this idea, again, and all of it is just prompts. Like, after choosing a keeper from a various list, you complete a series of steps to sort of tell the story. Do it as detailed as you want or as short as you want, depending on what your style of like solo RPGs is. And then you answer sort of 2 prompts listed under their heading. So each keeper will have a special sort of like questionnaire sort of thing. And then you choose a memorable event or deed that defines that moment that you are with the keeper. And you get to decide whether you achieved something great with them, or you were slightly like damaged or sort of misused by them. And there's 2 different tables for it. There's like victory and valor, and neglect and mischief. And I like that. Like, again, it's about a choice. It'd be like, I help everyone, hooray. But as you sort of talking about before, that idea of, as also the games are, like that ideas of isolation, melancholy, it doesn't have to be like that. And so you getting that choice as the player to be like, actually, where does the story go? What could it be like? And I know that's what I'm always a big fan of, like, oh, it's not as it seems and everything's really dark and bleak. But I like that it wasn't a chance roll of the dice. It was something that I could choose, like what feels right for my story, as what I've described so far. I guess one of my criticisms of the skeletons, and maybe this too, is about, like, I would love to see different tables and see what else we could do, but at the same time they seem like good enough. They seem broad enough, similar to like Timeskip. It seems broad enough that you could fit anything around them.
I think that they do have expanded tables available for Artifact.
Nice.
That, like, okay, I'm finding one right now that appears to be an option for if the magical artifact is instead like a sentient hive.
Ooh, cool.
Like insect hive of some sort.
Oh, I love that.
What kind of, it's a colony is how they refer to it, I guess, to make it work as like, if you could be like a bunch of fishies or birds or something like that. Oh, this might be a prompt. So this might be like a thing where like the artifact is left. It's left at a
that's something
at a colony that then affects the object.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
Interesting.
This is why you don't read rules to figure it out while you're talking.
But this is the thing, right? I think instantly you're like, oh, but what if one of the artifacts is a colony or something? Like, is a living thing? Like, yeah, because obviously there's so many sci-fi creatures which are just like, we are legion, that kind of thing. So again, why wouldn't you have that? So I think that would be my thing, is that I'd love to see expansions of different artifacts, like the different archetypes,
totally,
just to see what else we can do. Because even though, as you said, people will make different choices even having the same prompts, but it was I remember that distinctly from the Skeletons when I was looking at it a little while ago, is like it had some good ideas, but then I was like, I think because of that scenario, because it was like, you are guarding this tomb and you are undead, I was like, it gets to a point where I can imagine that is the same over and over. Like it doesn't feel like expanded, because it's going to be a grave, it's going to be a shrine, or it's going to be underground. Whereas here, you can be anything, and the worlds can be anything. So maybe there's a little bit more room to play around with. So maybe you don't need those expanded tables too much.
I will say that I know that Mousehole Press, run by Jack Harrison, is currently working on a card-based version of Artifact.
Yes, I saw that. Yeah.
So I wonder if part of their reasoning was that it's easier to like roll out an expansion via cards than it is to like release a new edition of a book, with additional pages.
Yeah.
I would be curious to see how that pans out. It might be something he's already talked about elsewhere. I don't know.
That's part of like a 3 RPGs, one like sort of Bucket of Bolts artifact, and then a new one as well.
Yes. The art is so good.
Yeah,
I just need to call that out too. If I find the name of the artist, I will highlight them because they're freaking great.
They are. It's such a gorgeous design. This is an interesting one because like I've had a conversation with someone recently on Where about like the overlap between board games and role-playing games, because in my head the definition of a role-playing game is pen and paper
and dice.
But then board games, you don't have that. You have elements of like plastic and all that, and cards. But nowadays we have like role-playing games that have like card elements to it. Like Good Society, Daggerheart is going to have customization. So Spectaculars has the same thing. And I'm like, what actually is a role-playing game? What is a board game anymore? Like, it's do you need it as a card thing? Fiasco has done it as cards now.
Fiasco. Okay, I knew I was thinking of something. Have you played any card-based role-playing games? I have not, that I can think of.
Like not solely just based on cards. Like a Good Society, for example, you can have prompts and stuff, but they are also available as PDF, that you can get them elsewhere. I guess the only one I can think of off the top of my head that has like an online version of it would be like Alice is Missing, for example, and that has that sort of prompts and that sort of aspect of it. But if there are ones out there, but I feel like the unique element isn't that, it's cards. It's because, for example, Alice is Missing, it's a completely silent role-playing game. It's like,
Wait, what? I have actually never played Alice is Missing. I did not know that. That's wild.
Oh, well, I'll quickly describe it. Yeah, you're right. People might not have heard of it. So essentially, it is a 3-hour game. And the first hour and a half, you set up the characters about your friend Alice is missing. And then you play like a 90-minute in real time trying to find her. Through solely through texting or through Discord messaging. You don't speak at all.
Really?
Yeah, and you ideally should be in the same room with the lights down low, and then at every like 10 minutes, I think someone flips over a card and it says there's a prompt and people can see what happens. And yeah, the story changes from there. And the cool thing I love about it, which I won't go on too much because I know we're going to talk about something else, is that at the beginning, so each of you has a secret that something that has happened to Alice. So you have something. So you leave her a voice note.
Yes.
And you keep that hidden until right at the end, and then you play them all like one after another in a certain order, which reveals what happened to Alice that night she disappeared. And it's one of the most interesting role-playing games I've ever played. I don't know if you can really stream it. Like, I've seen people trying to stream it. It's very different and interesting, but it's definitely one I always recommend trying out. But again, it's 90 minutes of you in character, which can be quite intense, but it's what I would definitely recommend it. It's a very interesting game.
That's fascinating. Wow. Okay, I love that. I don't know when I will be able to convince some people to play that with me, but I want to.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you have to double check with everyone because it's a cool experience. Basically it feels like a LARP because you are playing her friends trying to find out where she is. So if you do it like that rather than a role playing game, but I agree, it's one of those ones which I was so glad I was able to play in it, and it has like its own soundtrack. And speaking of soundtrack, sorry, I just realized coming back to Artifact slowly is that it has like a cool little page where if you like, how do I keep time or whatever, you can like listen to music, like little stings essentially of the music, and it does it by time. And I was like, that's really cool. I really appreciate an RPG really cool. that does that, you know, so that you don't, I mean, obviously you could do a timer, I know, but I like that. It's a little bit of that's a quite cute thing that they thought about and then commissioned someone to do loads and loads of music, like little, 13 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes, 6 minutes, etc.
Speaking of them hiring great artists, I will come back to at Bad Bucket, Connor Fawcett Connor Fawcett is their name. At Bad Bucket is their handle. They are the artist who is working on the Artifact card game, and I think also the other ones. And boy, they make some cool stuff. They make some real cool stuff.
Is there anything about Artifact yourself? Because obviously we both played Artifact compared to Timeskip. Is there anything you think you would improve about it? Bearing in mind, I appreciate we both played this ages ago.
A long time ago.
But I guess anything that would improve the experience of it, or anything you would advise someone who's about to play Artifact themselves going into it?
I think that to the point that you were making earlier, I think having the ability to have like additional options, additional roll tables, additional prompts is nice. I don't know that I personally would ever get to the point where I had played it so much that it was starting to feel stale.
Yes.
But I do think it's possible that I would potentially read all of the prompts and then know them so well that I can't be surprised anymore. But again, that's something that the deck edition could conceivably make that a much easier problem to deal with, to just be like, all right, let's make some new decks. Somebody made some custom ones online and you can just kind of slip those cards into the deck, that sort of thing, just to kind of expand the experience.
Yeah, I think the only thing I could think of is actually something that you were talking about right at the early on, is that you were introduced to it as playing it as a 2-player game. I think, because that's the thing for me, is that I don't know if I would, the replayability of this, like I think it's a really cool idea as a GM to do like the histories of it. But I think maybe I'd be like, okay, 3 items and done. But I like the idea of maybe each of your players, like let's create an item that you have that, well, not even that your character will ever get, but something in the history of the world building stuff, and then you play it together. And so that they suddenly hear like, wait, there's the downfall of the Bandit King in the town over. Wait, I had a Bandit King in this story, and then work out the timelines. I think that's the thing for me. I think, where would I see this? Not just like, I've created this item, I'm going to put it into my campaign. I think, where can I get the players invested in said item? Because otherwise I have this very cool history and I'm like, they've picked up the deck, or they've put on the slippers of, I don't know, comfortableness, I don't know, like,
and then they throw it into a ravine and never see it again.
Yeah, exactly, it goes into the bag, absolutely. So yeah, I think I would definitely, and it doesn't need, I don't think that's something, again, the GM could just about, as you were saying, like, just do it together. But I think that's the only thing I would maybe add as a suggestion, is like, get your players to create like an item or two per campaign and have that history, so that they've got a little piece of the world that they might not know happens, or that the other players might not know about, but that they've created something. I always think it's important to have something that the players created in the world, so that they have that investment. They're not just being passive as the adventure happens to them.
I think doing it like that could be really interesting, where you task the players to, like, hey, if you want a cool magic item for free, well, then you got to play through this thing. And then I want you to give me your answers to all the prompts.
Yeah.
And then, if you're the sort of GM who, like, let's say you already have the campaign going and you're like, I don't want them to like wreck things, right? Because I already have like a plan. I have world building in place, and they're just going to make something wild that I can't think of a way to fit it in. Well, you can say like, all right, what you're presenting to me is like legend. It is the legend of this item. So if it doesn't work, then it doesn't work. But if it does, but if I can make it work, I will make it fit.
I love that. Yeah. So it is like this. Yeah, it might not happen, but we'll actually, we could actually. Yeah, I like that. Gives you an idea. Going, oh, I like that. Maybe I'll tweak it a little bit. Maybe it is like the legend, the story, the myth. So this is what you've heard as a character, but that's not necessarily what happened. But it gives you still have that outline.
You had mentioned earlier, when we first were talking about this, that it doesn't just have to be magic sword. That's totally true. It's one of the things that I really like about this game. There's only like two weapon, the sword and the shield.
Yes.
Are like the two like specifically battle things.
Yeah.
Unless I'm forgetting a third. If your players make an item, they make a sword, they make a shield, and they've gotten like a +2 fiery sword that, okay. And then 3 sessions later, I find another +2 sword that's radiant. And I mean, I guess I'll swap between the two, but it's like, no, but the fiery sword is the sword that they crafted the lore of and they played as, and they know how lonely it is. They have an emotional investment in the sword. And so you're not just going to run into that thing of like people just rotating through their stuff as much. They will love the item ideally, and want to hold on to it and want to stick with it. And then if like, something happens to it, they're not going to say like, oh, well, fell into the river. They're going to be like, okay, we need to figure out how to get this thing out of the river.
This is super important. Yeah, this adds an emotional connection to it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Ty, thank you so much for coming. Again, a quick, nice, short one. Very much appreciate your time. And thank you for bringing these two RPGs, again, back to my consciousness. Yeah, I really like Timeskip. I think, again, hopefully when I get back to doing sort of long-term campaigns, it's something I could put in. Because I think, it's just to encourage those players to contribute more. And Artifact's great. We love Artifact. So thank you so much for bringing that back to our zeitgeist. As I sign off, where can we find you? What exciting, cool things are happening in your neck of the woods? What would you like to promo, my friend?
I am currently releasing a new episode or new quest on SEQ, but it's going to run from late August to mid-October. So 8 episodes long. It's part of this ongoing anthology series, Side Character Quest, but you can jump in. It was designed from the ground up. You can jump in fresh. You don't need to know anything in advance. So like people are more than welcome to wait until all the episodes come out so they can binge straight through it or whatever. I don't know. do whatever you want.
They come for the new 8-part series and then stay for the rest of Side Character Quest. That's the plan, right?
It is really, really good. I really enjoyed it, and I hope that other people will as well. People check it out. Side Character Quest. It starts with episode 101.
101. And where can we find that? It's all podcast places?
Yes, all podcast places. I recently got it up and running on YouTube as well, although I don't think anybody listens there yet.
You never know.
And we also have a really cool website, sidecharacterquest.com. It's got some beautiful artwork that my sister did.
Beautiful. Absolutely gorgeous artwork. Oh, thank you so much, Ty. And thank you, listeners, again for joining us. Obviously, you can find me on What Am I Rolling, which is a twice-monthly tabletop RPG one-shot podcast. As always, it's doing very well. We've done some world building as well. Go check out the Artifact episode. I can't remember what it is off the top of my head, but I'll make sure I'll put a link in the show notes because it is one of my favorite ones I've done. I really enjoy those sort of RPGs.
It's really cool.
Oh, that's very kind. So check that out. With all that out of the way, thank you so much, listeners, and we'll speak to you next time. And no doubt we'll have Ty back on again. Just to give us more sort of, woo, we'll do the whoop at the end of the beginning. All right. Much love and bye.
Bye. Oh, my brain just went so blank. Oh, what was I going to say?
You're asking the wrong person. I don't know.
Oh no. I can just hear the like that music.
Yeah. It cuts you off, doesn't it?
Yeah.